The Chevy Camaro was introduced in 1967 as a rapid response to the Ford Mustang, which had come out just a couple years prior. Flash forward to 1982 and we now have an all-new third generation model of the Camaro. This vehicle in particular is the 1983 model, which falls within that third generation, sold through the 1992 model year. For the third generation, we see a complete redesign of the vehicle and really in some ways a reprioritization of values. Fuel efficiency and meeting new requirements was a huge concern at this time, and so rather than really just increasing horsepower in the vehicle, Chevy instead decided to focus on increasing the handling capabilities. And the vehicle was met with huge accolades in this sense. Many considered it one of the best handling vehicles from this time. To improve the handling capabilities, it's got a completely revised suspension. At the rear, they replaced the old leaf springs with coil springs, and then at the front, we get dual control arms as well as struts and springs. The vehicle also loses 500 pounds in weight when compared with the second generation, and you'll see that for the first time, the Camaro is now a hatchback. For the third generation, you could get it as a hardtop in a T-top configuration, and then starting off in 1987, it was offered as a convertible for the first time since 1969. As far as trim package offerings go, the base model of the Camaro was the Sports Coupe. That was later replaced by the RS. Then you had the Berlinetta, which was a luxury package. It had a more luxurious plush interior, toned down exterior styling, and softer suspension. This is the Z28 model, which was a performance variant, and then they also offered the iroc-z, which was originally an appearance and performance variant of the Z28. It was so popular that it later became its own trim package, and then it was later dropped in lieu of the Z28. iroc actually stands for International Race of Champions, and Chevy sponsored that race for many years. Once they dropped the sponsorship, they were no longer able to use the iroc-z labeling on the Camaro, and that's why we see it transition back to the Z28. Styling-wise, the Camaro's got a classic 1980s look to it. It's very boxy, it's got a lot of straight planes to it, and as a kid that grew up in the 90s, I thought it was pretty ugly looking. But looking back on that now, I think that that's true of most kids looking at a 10 or 15-year-old vehicle. It's not new, it's not the latest design, so you don't get excited about it from that sense, and it's not old enough to be a classic. It kind of falls into that awkward space in the middle. But now this vehicle is almost 40 years old, and I can really start to appreciate it for what it is. In a lot of ways, I feel like the third generation Camaro is kind of the epitome of car design from the 1980s, and it's certainly a vehicle that's going to go down as a classic. Starting up here at the front end of the vehicle, it's got a really bold, aggressive look to it. You'll see that on the hood, it's got the fake air intakes with the dual black stripes. The headlights are a little bit tucked away with this black wraparound, and you'll see that the hood comes out in front of the fixtures. It's got the dual rectangular light fixtures for the low beam and high beam, and then the blinker is hidden all together back behind the bumper. It's also got a very prominent nose here, very pointed at the center. And then because this is the Z28 model, it's got the dual orange stripes and this little silver panel along the bottom that wrap around the vehicle 360 degrees. Coming around to the side, you'll see that the fender flares stick out just a tad. And then again, with the Z28 model, we also get a unique set of 15-inch wheels. A single reflector on the front fender, both sides. Z28 badging. And then we've got this single trim piece cutting through the middle of the vehicle. It's also got a pretty sleek mirror design. Pretty small in terms of visibility, but very aerodynamic. And then of course, because it's a hatchback, we've got a huge pane of glass here on the back, and you'll see little strips for heating it. Helps to defrost. This rear lip here has got kind of an integrated spoiler to it, and then a really sleek taillight design as well. Got the 3 colors, and it's just got a nice sleek look to it. More Z28 badging over here on the right hand side, and then we've got the dual exhaust down below. So although it took me quite a few years to get to this point, you know, I thought it was a really ugly vehicle growing up, but I can really start to appreciate it now that it's getting up there in age. I think it really does have a classic 1980s look to it, and it was a very unique design for its era. Well, just as the exterior of the Camaro's got a very 80s look to it, likewise, you'll see that inside this interior is very representative of the 80s, and it's got a really cool vibe. It's a very boxy interior. We've got this cool shelf on the top that is sticking out from the dash. Got these 2 vents that are hanging down. We've got these little boxes that are jutting out on either side of the instrument cluster. Likewise, we've got a box here in the middle, this bar at the bottom. Likewise, in the middle here, everything is very boxy, and it just has a really cool look to it. This model in particular, being almost 40 years old, you can see is in excellent condition. The seats are obviously also very representative of the 80s. They're very plush, very soft, a little bit soft for today's car standards, but it is very comfortable in some sense. As far as options, again, for a vehicle from 1983, there weren't a whole lot of options available, but it's got a pretty decent level, you know, given what would have been available at that time. As far as options that we do get, windows and door locks are manually operated. Likewise, the driver's side mirrors manually operated with a little stick that's on the inside here. We do get a cigarette lighter, heated rear windshield, and we get climate control with heat and air conditioning. Below that, we've got our audio system. You'll see we've got the ERS badge right here. It says extended range sound system, and there are 4 presets for your radio. We've got AM, FM radio, and then we've got an ashtray right in front of that. This is equipped with the automatic transmission. We've got our emergency brake over here, and then we've got a center console. Sitting in the front passenger seat here, you can see I've got plenty of legroom. This is where I'd want it positioned for driving. I'm 5'10". We'll go ahead and jump into the back. We've got a lever down here. Just pull that, and the seat folds forward, and then we can jump into the back. Access isn't all that bad, although this seat belt's a little bit annoying. And then we'll pull the seat back. And you'll see the back here, I fit all right. I've got a decent amount of legroom, couple inches to spare. Headroom is the main thing that's a little bit on the tight side, but otherwise it's fairly comfortable back here. We also get an ashtray in the rear for the rear passengers. To open up the rear hatch on the Camaro, it's kind of a unique setup. We've got to fold down this rear license plate, and the keyhole is concealed back behind. Go ahead and twist the key, and the rear hatch opens up, and you'll see that cargo space is pretty good, although the floorboard does come up pretty tall. Part of that, though, is that we've got a hatch at the rear here that is lockable. Key in here and turn, and you'll see we've got quite a bit more cargo space down below. Kind of a cool setup to be able to lock things in the back of the car. And then likewise, we've got another keyhole over here on the driver's side to open up an additional hatch. Also got the privacy cover that's built in here, conceal objects in the back. And then in addition to all of that, we can also fold down this rear seat. There's a lever over here on the side that drops down, and when those seats are not in use, further increases that rear cargo area. For 1982, the Camaro was offered with 4 different engine options. Your base engine is a 2.5 liter inline 4-cylinder with a measly 90 horsepower and 132 pound-feet of torque. Doesn't get much better with a 2.8 liter V6, which sees 102 horsepower and 142 pound-feet of torque. For comparison, a 2020 Toyota Prius has 121 horsepower. Now, the 82 Camaro was also offered with two different 5-liter V8s. They had a carbureted version with 145 horsepower and 240 pound-feet of torque, as well as a fuel-injected version, which saw 165 horsepower and the same 240 pound-feet of torque. If you went with fuel injection, you were stuck with the 3-speed automatic. The other models were available with either that 3-speed automatic or a 4-speed manual. The fastest you could do 0 to 60 on an 82 Camaro was about 9.5 seconds, so not particularly quick, but the one advantage of these being underpowered is that fuel economy was pretty decent. 4-cylinder would see about 19 miles per gallon in the city and 27 miles per gallon on the highway. With the 6-cylinder, you were looking at 16 in the city and 24 on the highway, and with the 8-cylinder, you were looking at 13 in the city and 20 on the highway. In 83, they add an additional cog to each transmission, so the 3-speed automatic increases to a 4-speed automatic, the 4-speed manual increases to a 5-speed manual, and then we get a new 5-liter V8 with 190 horsepower and that same 240 pound-feet of torque. In 1985, they add the iroc-z model, which offers the option of a new 5-liter V8 with 215 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque. In 87, they take things even further, bringing down a Corvette-sourced 5.7-liter V8 with 225 horsepower and 330 pound-feet of torque. With that model, that 0 to 60 time drops to about 6.5 seconds. And then in 88, they add even more power. The 5-liter V8 increases to 230 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque, and the 5.7 increases to 245 horsepower and 345 pound-feet of torque. Well, it's always fun to drive an old classic vehicle. When you drive newer cars, a lot of times they all kind of start to blend together. They all feel the same, and there's just something really fun about old vehicles like this. It's obviously got a really unique interior, gives you a very unique feel when you're driving it. Likewise, it's got a really great exhaust note, as you just heard. And overall, it's actually a pretty nice vehicle to drive, given that it's almost 40 years old. Now, I mentioned earlier that this vehicle received a lot of accolades when it first came out in terms of handling capabilities. And by today's standards, it certainly isn't the best handling vehicle out there. But compared to other vehicles from the 80s, it actually is very impressive how normal the overall ride feels in this vehicle. It's very easy to drive. It's got a very smooth ride, very compliant, and the handling is pretty nice overall. I'm also really impressed with the steering feel. It's got a really nice tight feel to it for a vehicle from this time period. And then of course it's also got power steering, so it's very easy when compared with some other older vehicles. And just all around, it really is a very easy vehicle to drive, but it's also fun because it's loud, it's powerful, not particularly quick because again, you know, by today's standards, the horsepower is definitely on the lower end. But it doesn't really matter. That's not what this is about. It's about the noise, it's about the experience, and the Camaro delivers very well in all of those capacities. One thing that's definitely kind of cool about the 3rd generation Camaro is that it's definitely a vehicle that is going to be a classic, but it's not full-on classic status yet, and so they're still pretty reasonably priced. This vehicle in particular, you know, is listed at $9,000. It's got 74,000 miles, and it's in pristine condition inside and out. You look at Camaros from the 1960s, you know, the late 60s when they first came out, and for a Camaro in pristine condition, you're going to be looking at, you know, 60, 80, some models probably are even up in the $100,000 range. Now, obviously, given that that was the first Camaro and it was much more popular than the 3rd generation, this probably won't quite reach those heights, but it's certainly going to increase quite a bit in value compared to where it's currently sitting. So that's a look at the 3rd generation model of the Chevy Camaro. Although it took me many years to get here, I can finally appreciate this vehicle for what it is. I think that this 3rd generation Camaro is definitely going to go down as one of the coolest classics from the 80s. It's got a really cool look inside and out, great handling for a vehicle from the 80s, and it does have a few powertrain options that give a pretty good amount of performance. If you have any comments or questions on the Camaro, leave them in the section below. For more car reviews, be sure to subscribe. In the meantime, thanks for watching.